Yael Mishly is a PhD candidate in economics at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Her research focuses on the issues of reparations and intergenerational mobility as a means of examining how the second generations of the Holocaust are overcoming their parents' limitations in comparison to the fifth Aliyah. In addition, her work on the topic of reparations provides an opportunity to learn how countries can support their disadvantaged citizens. So this is a challenging subject. Yael, bevakasha.
So, good afternoon. I'm very excited to present today this research. For what Colette said, there is no research yet the checking the effect of the reparation, and that's for a very simple reason that the data is very hard to find. I mean, in the last 2 years, I'm trying to get data to understand who received reparation, who received from Germany, who received from the State of Israel. Not very successful, but still I have some data, and this is what I want to share with you today. So this research is done by Aviv and me in the Hebrew University, and we are moving forward several years. Nobody after the end of the debate about the reparation. And we are looking at the effect of personal reparation due to damage to health on social mobility of the Holocaust survivors and of the second generation. As economists, we are interested in social mobility as it is a key element in reducing inequality. The research relies on data, what we can find so far, and I will describe it later on. In my talk, I will go over the backstage of the research and try to explain why and what we did, and of course, what we found. So we began the reparation research after observing significant gaps in socioeconomic characteristics such as education or income between Holocaust survivors and European Jews who immigrated to Palestine before the war, the fifth Aliyah. And we can see it here in this figure, the gap. In the x-axis, you can see the year of immigration, and the Y present the average education years of all the men who arrived at the same year. So if you are looking at the year 1929 to 1938, we can see education of pre-war immigrants, and between 1945 and 1952, we see the Holocaust survivors' education, and you can see that the Holocaust survivors' education is around 2 years less than the pre-war education. The gap depends on the age of immigration. Although a common knowledge is that educated parents tend to have educated children, and less educated parents tend to have less educated children, we can see here, the second figure, that the sons of the Holocaust survivors almost caught up. The gap is much narrower on the second generation, and what it means is that the second generation of Holocaust survivors perform much better than expectation in spite of their parents' lower education and income. So after seeing this figure, we started to ask ourselves some questions. We wanted to know what are the consequences of the Holocaust regarding socioeconomic status of the survivors. How did the second generation perform, and and this is the main question that's relevant today, how did the reparation affect survivors and their offsprings? So first, we were interested to know about the survivors themselves. And we found that Holocaust survivors came with low education, as you saw in the figure. They had lower income through all their life, about 20% lower than pre-war immigrants, even with reparation, and they lived in lower neighborhood ranking relative to the pre-war immigrants. We also found that the gap was narrowed in the second generation. yet there are some persistence even in the third generation. And we found that the German reparation increased social mobility and speed up the convergence. And I think this is most interesting finding, that the children of low-educated Holocaust survivors benefited the most from the reparation. In a way, we can say that the reparation did compensate survivors' family in a monetary aspect. Of course, we are not dealing with any other aspect. So I want to make some short methodology thing because most of you are historians and this is an economy research. So the desirable research plan includes randomly assigned research objects between groups of people that otherwise are similar. So the most important issue we had to deal with was composing appropriate comparison groups which will be as much similar as possible except the reparation. We use anonymized unique dataset prepared by Israeli Central Bureau of Statistics, including demographic, education, and income information. And we also use data from the Authority of Holocaust Survivor Rights. It's the body that pays the Israeli allowances. And we have this data for all Israeli citizens. We used strict criteria to define our sample. We looked at people who were born in Poland, Romania, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary. Those countries were chosen since survivors from this country were eligible to different reparation programs, and we'll explain this later on. We took out Germany, or German-born survivors, because they were entitled for unique types of compensation and restitution. Some of them were based on their previous socioeconomic status. We focus on specific birth cohort who immigrated before the war or a few years just after the war, but spent most of their life in Israel to avoid different economic or cultural influence. Then we stratified this chosen population to 4 comparable groups. Our baseline group, composed of pre-war immigrants, who represent the potential status or achievement of survivors if they would have immigrated before the war. As for the survivors, because of the territorial criterion of the BEG laws, at the second half of the 1950s, it became clear that there are 2 classes of Israeli Holocaust survivors. One class, the lucky one, or the more lucky ones, were eligible for German reparation. This class includes those who were born in Germany or stayed in Germany, DC camps at the beginning of 1947 and then left, or people who lived in German territories outside of Germany and could pass the test of being part of the German culture group. The other part was all those who or not belong to the first party. And during the end of the 50s, it became clear that they actually don't get reparation or don't get any compensation. A partial correction for this inequality made in 1957 with the Israeli law, which ensured monthly allowance to disabled Holocaust survivors who are Israeli citizens at that time. Although the law guaranteed monthly payment as the BEG laws, the amount was about 60% from the German allowance, and since the 60s, it even was less, about 40%. The last group includes Holocaust survivors who didn't receive reparation at all, whether they didn't want to ask for German money or stayed during the war in places that were not acknowledged by the German authority. The laws were lately changed. In 2007, 2014, more and more population were eligible for getting reparation from the Israeli Ministry of Finance, and people get from the Article 2, of course, but those people didn't get the money where they raised their children. So for us, we treat them as non-recipients. But the question is, are these groups are alike? This is a normal concern. Did those who left Europe before the war wiser, richer, or poorer than those who stayed? Did the survivors were smarter than those who murdered? Who chose to immigrate to Palestine or Israel, and who preferred to go to the USA, Canada, or Australia just after the war? And finally, can I claim that the BG recipients are similar to the Ministry of Israel, Ministry of Finance in Israel recipients? When non-German survivors had to pass tests to prove belonging to the German culture group, a test that can be a priori in favor of more educated people. Moreover, as we heard yesterday and even today, the process for the BEG reparation application was much more complicated, and a better and probably much more expensive lawyers increased the odds to succeed in the process. So maybe richer people were more intent to get their money from Germany. Unfortunately, I cannot go into it, and I cannot give a strict answer, but by restricting the sample to specific countries and birth cohort, we minimize this problem. So what do we mean when we're talking about social mobility? There are several ways to look at social mobility. We can look at mobility within generation, which means how one's effort, ability, and circumstances determine his social status. Or we can look between generation. Why is it generation? Which is the intergenerational mobility, that measure the effect of a person's parent on his own achievement. When the intergenerational mobility is high, person's achievement will be related to his own attributes, while when intergenerational mobility is low, achievement will be more depends on family's background. So in that case, in low mobility, disabilities of parents have stronger effect on children's achievement. How does parents influence their children's socioeconomic status? This is a very long time debate between nature and nurture. Of course, this is not what we are going to talk about today. In this research, we focus on one path in the nurture, which is investment in children, direct investment in children, under the assumption that the investment depends on family income. So now finally, what did we find? So in the first generation, how did the reparation affect the Holocaust survivors? This is what we can see here. This figure presents socioeconomic status of the neighborhoods where the survivors are living in 1983, meaning after many years of receiving the reparation. The numbers are indexed that prepared by the Central Bureau of Statistics. They rank all the neighborhoods in Israel between 1 to 20. 20 is the highest ranked neighborhood. They use income in the neighborhood, education, and many other socioeconomic measurement of all the people that are living in the same neighborhood. So what I show here is the rank by 3 groups of education. People who studied less than 12 years of education, people who did matriculation, which is the final examination after 12 years, the Bagrut. This is something that every person in Israel needs to do if he wants to keep on studying, and academic. And I did it because I wanted to compare people with similar education. If you remember, I was wondering if the BG and the Ministry of Finance recipients are similar. So if I'm looking at the same level of education, I think that the people should be much more similar. So what we can see here, that at every level of education, the BEG recipients are living in a much higher or much better neighborhood. In each education category, they are in green. They live in a better neighborhood. The takeout of this figure is that higher German reparation helps survivors to live in better neighborhoods than survivors who received less money from the State of Israel. In the second generation, so now we are looking at intergenerational mobility and actually want to see the difference between father and child. Once again, higher intergenerational mobility is better if you want to close the gaps. Higher intergenerational mobility means that the children are ranking much higher than the father. So we choose to look at education as a measurement for the socioeconomic status. We ranked each person among his birth cohort in a scale of 1 to 100. So someone with exactly average education is ranked in the 50s. This is what you see right now. We can see 4 groups of fathers that are having average education. Now we compared between father's rank and son's rank. In this figure, I present the rank of sons to father with average education. All sons did better than their fathers. You can see that all the children are ranking in 16s and up. Once again, 50 is the average. They are all ranking above average and above the parents. And the sons of the sons of BEG survivors are ranking in the highest rank. Then sons of pre-war immigrants and Israel recipients are ranking the same. Sons of Holocaust survivors who didn't receive reparation at all experience less mobility. We can see the same pattern at each level of father's education. It's just the same one that I showed in the previous figure. Always sons of BEG recipients experience faster mobility than all the others. What's more to say is that the gap between BEG recipients to MOF recipients, to the Israeli recipient, is bigger when the education of the parents is lower, which means that the sons of low-educated fathers benefited more from the reparation, from the money. So to conclude, Holocaust survivors had lower education than the pre-war immigrants. The gap decreased in second generation. Higher reparation increased social mobility, and children of fathers with low level of education benefited more from the reparation. So was the reparation a successful policy? Of course, it depends on the aim, which is not only one goal. As we talked about it yesterday, what is the aim of reparation? I'm not going to answer this, but from our perspective, the German reparation had intergenerational impact, positive impact, and helped the second generation to close the socioeconomic gap relative to the pre-war European immigrant. So this is a takeout from the past, and we can use this research and these foundings also to talk about lots of reparation programs that are going on today, and especially the debate on the reparation to the slavery in the United States and lots of places all around the world. Actually, unfortunately, many places now are dealing with the same situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yael, for this very interesting presentation. I'd like to add maybe 2 or 3 things. First of all, I think that you may or may not have mentioned the fact that what happened with the reparations, with the various programs in Israel, was a patchwork. It started at a very low level. The first law that was enacted was only in 1957, and it was very limited, both in scope in terms of the population that were the recipients and also in terms of what they received. By comparison, you are right, the pensions of the BG were much higher, and that created a lot of inequality and grievances between the Holocaust survivors themselves. However, that situation was reversed. And certainly, as of, I think, 2014, it turned out that the recipients of the BG received less money than the pensions of the Ministry of Finance. And so one of the things that happened as a result is that as a result of pressures put by certain Holocaust survivors, the recipients of the BEG who receive less than the Israeli recipients from the Ministry of Finance receive an additional sum of money of 10,000 shekel per year from the Israeli government. How this affects the next generation, I do not know, but I just thought that it's important to mention a few things, that BEG today is less generous, I think, than the Israeli government. And that over the years, there has been a real change of attitude in the Israeli government. If in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and even the 80s, the Israeli government was very reluctant and very slow in acknowledging the rights of Holocaust survivors, the gradual change started in 2007, 2008, and then certainly in 2014 with an important amendment to the law that was passed by none other than Yair Lapid, who at that time was the Minister of Finance. And just as a compliment, I think that today the Israeli government is doing actually quite an effort, and the annual budget out of taxpayers' money, not from Germany, is of 6 billion shekel for various programs for Israeli Holocaust survivors. I hope that, certainly the first generation suffered a lot. The Israeli government tries to make up for it, but again, even the 6 billion are not enough. And so what I think we should all try to do is to see how much more can be done, because we haven't got much time left.